Hey everyone, my name is Dan Kim. Thanks for coming. And today we're going to talk about how you can build a full stack side project web app entirely in Kotlin. I know it's the last talk of the day, so we'll try to keep it lively and fun, and we'll do a tight 35 and get you to the party. All right. So stop me if you've heard this one before. You're sitting around with your friends or your coworkers, and you start, jamming on ideas, and then you start talking about an app and be like, oh, really, it'd be really cool if we had this thing. I can't believe it doesn't exist. And you're like, oh, I want to build this thing, right? Like, I can build it. I have the technical skills to do that. And so you're like, I'm going to build this thing, and I'm going to share it with all my friends, right? It's going to be really cool, and it's going to be really useful for a lot of people. So then your train of thought is kind of like, all right, how and where am I going to build this thing, right? So you start thinking about, like, how am I going to get this done? What tech should I use? What platform should I use? I can write it in Android or iOS, but then I got to deal with the store and developer accounts and all that kind of stuff and approvals. And so, like, kind of sometimes, or at least I do, I land on sort of the web. The web is usually like the best place for like little side projects, right? It's still the most accessible to most people. You don't have to, again, deal with approvals or have a developer account to do anything. It's cheap. You have lots of options to deploy. So the web is still really great for side projects. So you got this idea, and so you know it's going to be on the web. But if you're a back-end developer, or you're a data scientist, or an Android developer, like, you're probably like me, kind of like, how do you build a web app in 2025? Like, I have no idea. So again, maybe it's just not your skill set. It's not your fault. You just maybe haven't done it in a while. So then you're like, all right, well, let's see if we can figure out how to do this. You start thinking about all the stuff that you have to do. Like, all right, I got to kind of remember how to do HTML. I got to do CSS because I got to sort of make it look reasonable. I probably got to write some JavaScript to make it, function and look like people would expect. Then you're kind of like, well, I need like a component library probably to do some stuff, so maybe I'll use React or Vue or Angular. Then you still have to write like the back-end logic and the services. And then you still need to connect to a database, right? So now all of a sudden you're like, oh God, like, do I really want to do all this for a side project? Like, it's just kind of a bummer. There's so many things you have to do, right? And then your side project, your wonderful idea, the thing you were all excited about, kind of dies on the vine, right? It takes all the fun out of it. And with side projects, like, momentum matters, right? You're excited, you talk to your friends about it, and you want to build that thing. So momentum matters, and you need that enthusiasm, and you need that momentum. So what if I told you, though, you could do it all in Kotlin? Like, you wouldn't have to write any HTML or CSS or anything like that. And I mean do it easily, too. Like, not a ton of configuration, not a bunch of hacks put together, no dealing with stuff that you don't really care about, right? And it'll look good, it'll be responsive, it'll act like an SPA, kind of like all the things you would expect. And so it's basically just going to be like a website that talks to a database and does your standard CRUD operations. Now, you would be right to be skeptical because it's not really something people talk about a lot, right? So you don't hear about it a ton. And so the thing is, I have actually done this, and I've written production apps using these frameworks. So we're going to prove it out. We'll get past the preamble here, and let's get into some code. We are going to build a full stack web app entirely in Kotlin, as promised. And before we jump into the code, I just want to kind of lay the framework of like what the assumptions are about this. This is for a fun side project type thing. You could use it in production. There are elements of this that I have used, some of it I have not, but this is intended to be for like a fun little side project. We are going for fast and easy, not like architectural perfection. We're not going to like try to make this picture perfect to any particular architecture. So simpler is better. I'm not going to do any DI. We're not going to write any tests, because nobody writes tests on their side projects. And we're going to make it in a way that's really like easy to build and like easy for us to understand. So put all that stuff aside. OK, so let's talk about the tools we're going to use, the parts of the framework. So for the database, we're just going to use Postgres. I'm not going to go into like all the reasons why. Basically, it's easy and fast and pretty standard database. You can use any database you want, MySQL, H2, SQLite, whatever, as long as it is supported by our ORM, which is going to be JetBrains exposed. This is a framework that's going to allow us to do all of our CRUD operations in a type-safe, Kotlin-friendly way. It's been around for a while, but I think in the last year or so, I think I saw in the last Kotlin conf, JetBrains really decided to put a bunch of effort behind it, and they put their full weight of the organization behind it. So it's come a long way. And I would say that it's arguably one of the most underrated libraries that JetBrains has right now. It's not talked about a lot compared to multi-platform and all these other fun things, but I think it's one of the most useful ones. So it's very reliable, very robust. And if you've ever worked with, like, if you're a Java developer, if you've ever worked with JPA or Hibernate or Juke, it's way better than those. So I would suggest you at least take a look at it. The UI is where a lot of the magic happens, and these are two frameworks that you probably haven't heard about. One is called Vaadin, and then Caribou is sort of built on top of that. And so these are the key frameworks that are going to help us do a lot of the UI heavy lifting. Vaadin specifically is a server-side framework that has a bunch of pre-built components that are built into it. And so it does all the heavy lifting of writing the HTML, CSS, the JavaScript that help create that SPA. As great as Vaadin is, it is a very sort of Java-centric pattern library. And so Caribou is written on top of that as a DSL sort of library built on top of Vaadin. So yeah, that's going to be most of the UI stuff. Just to give you like a little preview, like this is just stuff off of Vaadin's website, but this is the kind of stuff you can build. You can build super nice looking, really good applications based just on Vaadin. And they give you all these pre-built components, right? Navigation, icons, tables, form components, data pickers, tab layouts, everything sort of you would need. And it is also free and open source. They have a couple like upgrade things you can buy if you want, but for the most part, everything you would need is all free and open source. So it's out there and ready for you to use. I will say, hopefully in like a year or so, maybe a year and a half or so, I hope this talk is about Compose WASM, right? Vaadin right now sort of fills that gap, and it's a very good tool. I hope, though, in a year, because I think they said that WASM beta was going to be later this year. I hope in like a year it's at full 1.0, it's ready to go. I hope this talk is about Kotlin or Compose WASM next year. Hopefully this is the future, but this is what we have right now. And the way that Vaadin works, it's sort of like Android in a weird way, or Swing. It does require us to do some stuff off the main thread, right? We got to do stuff async, and so we're going to use our favorite async mechanism, which is Kotlin coroutines. And then finally, we're going to use an app server loosely called Vaadin Boot, which is just a really lightweight way of firing up Jetty, installing Vaadin, and then running the application. If you wanted to, you could run Spring Boot here or anything else, whatever you wanted to sort of run the app server. This just kind of does it really easily. And again, what are we trying to do? Easy, fast, side project. OK, so what are we going to build? We're going to build a to-do app, mostly because I like to-do apps. I couldn't think of a better idea, really. I didn't want to do a blog like everybody else does. So we're going to do a to-do app. It's going to be a pretty standard set of functionality. You're going to have a list of to-dos. You're going to be able to create a new one. You're going to be able to edit or check off one. And then you're going to be able to delete one. All the CRUD operations you would expect. All right, let's get into it. So dependencies. I'm just going to show you this just so you know I wasn't cheating, although it's not like this is compiling. But for the most part, this is all you need. You just need the Kotlin standard libraries, and this is it. There's 3 for Vaadin, there's 3 for exposed, and then 2 just to connect Postgres and Hikari to connection pool. That's it. Like, there's not a ton of stuff here. OK, let's talk about the database setup. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk sort of low level to the highest level. We're going to start with the JetBrains exposed models. So our database is going to be basically just, our schema is basically going to be 2 tables, the to-do table and then the users table, which a to-do can be assigned to a single user. So this is what the JetBrains exposed models look like. And what they do is they just represent the table. Now what's really nice about this is that it's very readable, and it's all in Kotlin. Kind of just looks like a data class. It extends off of this int ID table, which basically says it's an ID-driven table, nothing crazy. And then you can see there's a title, description, duet, all this other good stuff. By just looking at this class, I bet you can all just understand what that table is. Yes, it's very simple, but you can see very clearly what they were trying to do. Same thing goes for users. It's just an int ID table, and it has a name. Right? So just by looking at this, again, it's just Kotlin. You don't have to worry about like a lot of other stuff. And then the one other sort of database-related thing is just data objects. I'm just telling you they're there because these are going to act as basically like our data transfer objects. They're just going to be POJOs, basically. And so this is going to be the layer where you get stuff from the database, you slam them into these things, and this is where you're going to pass them around to insert them or delete them or whatever else. And then lastly, just the other last bit of database stuff is just the connection pooling. So we're using Hikari. You don't really need to understand how it works. This is what a connection pool looks like. It goes off and makes a connection pool for you to Postgres. And then the one sort of interesting bit is the database part. This is exposed way of connecting to the database using that data source. And so I just kind of stuffed it, to hang out by itself so you can have access to this database object whenever you need to do a database operation. That's it. That's the DB stuff. OK, let's talk about the app itself. So Vaadin requires just one thing, really. Well, two things, but one thing to start is just this. This app shell is basically saying to Vaadin, I'm a Vaadin app. I'm extending off this app shell configurator. And I'm just setting two annotations to configure it. I'm setting a theme, which is basically like the directory the CSS file would live in. And then I'm setting this push mechanism, which basically is a WebSocket connection to allow sort of live updating either XHR or WebSocket connections to update the UI as you go. This is it. This is the configuration for Vaadin. There's no JSON. There's no conf files. There's nothing else. There's no YAML files. Right? It's just this to get the Vaadin app configured. The second thing we need is part of that Vaadin boot thing, which is sort of the Jetty app server I talked about. This is also it. This is your function to start the application. Vaadin boot.run. That's it. It fires up a Jetty server on localhost 5000, or sorry, localhost 8080, and then it will just run an empty web app. That's it. If you don't do anything else, you would have Jetty up and running, and you would have just like a blank page, basically. So now everything is set up. The database is set up. The app server is running. So now we're going to get to kind of the fun stuff, and we're going to build the UI, get some data, and show it. OK, so this is going to be the UI list, at least. I understand it's not going to win any design awards. I understand it's not the best looking thing. But the things it is, clean, fast, responsive. You can turn dark mode on if you want. There's not a lot to this. I didn't do a lot of setup to do this, and I'll show you that, right? So this is just a basic list. It's got linked to-dos that will open up the edit screen. You can check them off. It shows you a date that they're due. It shows you who they're assigned to. Nothing crazy, but like once I show you the code, you'll probably be more amazed. And then this is kind of what the form's going to look like, right? You click into one, or you're going to create a new one, and it's going to show you the information that you can change, right? So nothing too crazy. So the way we start with that with Vaadin is that we're going to create a layout file, so basically like a template file that you would see in most systems like this. And this is what that looks like. Every Vaadin app starts with a layout, which is basically going to be like typically your navigation on the top, side nav, whatever you want, the title of the app. It's just the general Chrome of the application that you would expect in most places. The only things to really call out here is that K-composite thingy up there. That K-composite is a part of that Caribou library, and anything that you want to be a component that you want to be able to show as part of the UI has to extend off of that. The other main thing here is this root object that we're creating with this UI method. So this is kind of the part that matters. This is sort of the hook that Caribou relies on. Basically, it says like anything in this UI block is what I'm going to lay out. So whatever's in that block is what it's going to render out. And so what you see here is we call the UI block, and then it's kind of DSL-y from there. We're going to create a vertical layout, which is just a column, and then we're going to put a div with an h1 inside of that div that just says to-dos. That's it. Like that's the title. Now, granted, that's not that impressive, but that's a very small amount of code to just write out. And it's very readable, right? You can understand by just looking at it exactly what it's going to do. We assign it to this root object in case we want to do something with it later. Often you don't, but it's there if you need it. If you wanted to, you could just put this UI block in the init of your class, and you'd be good to go. OK, so now we've got the Chrome, and we've got the basic layout. Now let's create the list. OK, so the list here on the left is where we want to be. The list here on the right is what we're going to do first, right? Just in terms of iterating the development, we're just going to do something very simple. We're just going to spit out all the data into a grid. OK, I know that's probably not very easy to read, but this is not the important thing to gather here is that all of this is, with the exception of doing the actual query, all of this is all you need to create that grid. This is 27 lines of code. And if you don't include the init block and the fetching of the data, it's 13 lines. So there's not a lot of UI to create. So let's get into it. So the very top, you see we have a route, right? That's Vaadin's annotation to basically say this is the route you're going to go to, right? So it's blank. It's just going to be localhost 8080. If I put /todos in there or whatever, then we'll go to /todos. And then you tell it which layout file you want to use, which is our main layout that we created earlier. The class to-do list, nothing special. Just like we said, it has to extend off of this K-composite class. OK, after that, we just want to create that grid, right? So that grid is just this. At the very top, you can see we have a latent property that's going to be grid of type to-do. That to-do is that data class we showed earlier. So everything in that grid now knows that it's a to-do object, and it knows how to display it. And then the UI for this is going to be a vertical layout. Again, just a single column with a grid inside of it. I cheat a little bit here by doing a set defaults, which just sets a couple like size parameters, nothing crazy. And then it writes out 3 columns, one for the title, one for duat, one for username. And then you can see we set a header on each of those. That's the title that you see at the top of it. This is it. This is the grid. This is all you have to do to write the grid. I can't even count how many lines that is. 10, maybe? So that's all you need to create a simple table. So the rest of the class, nothing special, but I'll talk about it real quick. The view model is just like a artifact of my Android days. I just called it a view model. It's somewhere to do some data fetching, and it's a place to put some view state. The observable class here, this view model.todos, it's just a kind of hacky observable I created. It's just a simple class I wrote that anyone can subscribe to, and then we'll emit a value to it anytime it gets a new value. You can use Rx, you can use flows or whatever else. Just for the sake of simplicity, I just wanted something that when it gets a value, it spits it back out to anybody that's subscribed. OK, so that's that. That little bit of grid code is all it took to get this. Now, granted, we have to go get some data. So let's talk about that. This is the 2 calls to do that. We would config the observers, and we listen on the view to that to-dos list. And then anytime we get a value sent to us, we're going to update the grid. We're going to say grid set items to whatever is passed into us. And then after we've configured the observers, we're going to fetch the data, right? We're going to go tell the view model, go get the data. So let's see how we do that. OK, this, again, looks like a lot of code, and it is kind of verbose, but it's not really a lot of stuff happening, and I'll break it down for you guys. There's basically 3 major areas. The first is that this to-do view model extends off the coroutine scope and sets up the coroutine context like you would expect. There's not a lot of crazy stuff going on here, so if you're familiar with coroutines, you should understand what's going on here. And then we have that observable thingy that I created at the top, which you can pass it values and will readmit itself. So there's nothing too wild here. It's sort of your typical coroutine context. And then the second area that's of interest is the actual fetch. So let's break this down, because again, it's way too much stuff. So in that fetch, the first thing we're going to do is launch a coroutine context. And then you see kind of an interesting little bit, this new suspended transaction. That is an exposed library thing that allows you to fire off a database transaction within a context that you provide. So in this case, what we're doing is, since we want to run off of the main thread, we are going to call a new suspended transaction, do it on the IO thread. We're going to pass it the database object that we created at the very beginning, which is a connection to our Postgres database. And then we're going to execute a query. Right? The query itself is not particularly hard, but all it's doing is, you can see it's joining up to the users table, and it's going to do a left join. So if there is no assigned user, it doesn't exclude those records. Then it's going to select all of them, and then it's going to do 3 order bys. That's it. It's a really simple query. This is exposed sort of like at its finest. Now, you can read this and I think probably pretty clearly see exactly what SQL is going to be run. And that's really kind of the beauty of exposed. The second part of that, once that query is set up, is that we need to then execute it. So the way that expose works is that once you call a collection sort of operation on the query is when it goes and executes it. So it does query.map. This is when it goes and runs the query. You're going to have a result row. And then all this is doing is mapping it to the data class that we set up earlier. So this is literally just creating a list of POJOs. So again, it kind of looks like a lot, but there's not a lot of complexity here. OK, so that's how we fetch the data. So now is probably a good time to take a brief sidebar onto exposed itself. So exposed is kind of different than most ORMs I've seen in that it gives you 2 different ways to sort of run your database operations. It has the DSL version, which we just showed, and it has the DAO version, which is sort of like what you're familiar with or what you've seen before. So if you've ever used Hibernate or in Rails Active Record or Juke or any of those, there's a sort of like magical DAO version of it, which looks really nice and is easy to use. All the models are sort of created, all the relationships are modeled inside of the classes. So the DSL version is a little less magical, but it gives you a lot more control and flexibility. So that's my preference. But this is what a sort of the equivalent query looks like when you use the DAO version. And so again, you model the relationships in the entity classes, and you abstract away some of the complexity of like joins and things like that. So you notice I'm not having to explicitly do a join here to get the users. The cons of it are like, there's magic, right? Like, depending on how you like your stuff, like magic can be both fun or it can be kind of like concerning. And it kind of purposely obscures away what SQL is going to be run by looking at it, right? You don't know if this is going to immediately join to the users table. You don't exactly know, but it's probably going to do something good. But there's other stuff that can happen. There's possible n+1 scenarios. There's eager and lazy fetching stuff. If you've ever worked with Hibernate, like you run into all the same stuff, right? There's always some transaction weirdness. I don't know. Take your pick. So my version of it, or the other version of it, which is the DSL version that I'm showing and going to continue to show through the rest of this talk, while it's a little bit more verbose, it's much clearer, right? You know exactly what's going to happen here. It's going to join to the users table, it's going to select all, and then it's going to do some order by. This is a trivial example, but if you had multiple joins, if you had lots of additional where queries that were dynamically added, this is going to get you there much easier and much more clearly than having to look at the entity classes in the DAO version. Just my opinion. I just think it's easier when you stay closer to the real SQL. So the DSL version is closer to real SQL, and in my experience, for every ORM that I've used, the farther you get away from the SQL, the more trouble you're going to probably get to at some point. So frameworks like Exposed, like SQLite, the ones that keep you closer to the SQL, in my opinion, are better choices, generally speaking. OK, that's my rant on the SQL DSL. Let's improve the list UI. OK, so this is our sort of not so great version over here. This is where we want to get to next, where we add a checkbox, and then we add this sort of a description at the bottom. I can already tell it's going to be kind of dense to kind of pack it all into one thing. So we're just going to cut a new component altogether. So we're going to create this wonderfully named to-do with checkbox, and we're going to pass it a to-do. Again, it's going to extend off kcomposite, which allows it to be rendered by Caribou. And again, that UI right now is just going to be a vertical layout, a column, with a span with a to-do title in it. That's it, because that's effectively what we had before. This would be effectively the same as what was existing. So now we want to add a checkbox, and we want to add the nodes, right? So we create a horizontal layout with the checkbox to the side, and then the to-do title over to the right. The checkbox has this other lambda here, the value, where you're saying if it's completed at, it's going to be checked. If it's not completed, then it will be unchecked. And then the to-do notes, if we have them, we will just write a span out. So again, you can see it's like very DSL-y, and it's kind of nice. So now we need to use that. Previously, we had this column that was just the title, just a string. We need to make a slight change to that, where we now add a component column, and we're going to pass in the to-do to the to-do checkbox, to-do with checkbox component, and then it's going to render itself. So that's how we get the checkbox and the description on there. OK, so now we have this on the left, but we want to make it a little bit nicer, right? We want to have links that open up the edit form, and then we want to do a strike through on the ones that are completed. OK, so how do we go from there to that? That to-do title thingy, we're going to add some more attributes to it. So we're going to add a class name called link text. So what that is basically going to make it look and function like a link. And then we're also going to add a class name called strike through if it's not completed, right? Or I'm sorry, if it's completed, then it'll have a strike through on it. The same thing similarly on the notes, right? If it's completed, then the notes will also have a strike through to it. So I did make one teeny tiny lie in this talk, which is that if you noticed, I said there was no CSS. There's a tiny bit of CSS that I had to write because I thought you could do this without doing CSS. So it's this stuff. It's just just these few lines. Don't look at it. Make your eyes bleed. OK, so even if you put that aside, there wasn't a lot of work that had to be done. OK, let's make the component functional now. So there's two things we want to add to it. We want an action when the edit is clicked, and we want an action when the checkbox is checked or unchecked. Let's start with this. So we're going to pass in two lambdas to the checkbox. And we're going to say, hey, at the call site, I'm going to tell you what to do when you are clicked to open, and I'm going to tell you what to do if you check off the box. So for the checkbox itself, what we're going to do is we're going to add a value change listener and say, hey, if I'm checked, pass me the event, and then run the operation that you told me to do, right, with the event, which is basically saying I checked it or I didn't check it. And then once we get over here to the to-do title, we're going to do the same thing, right? So when we click on the to-do title, we want it to do something. So we're going to add a click listener here as well, and it's going to just run the operation, the Lambda that you sent into it. OK, so now we have to pass in those operations to the to-do with checkbox component. So this is what we have now. This is what it's going to be. So I'm going to leave onClick link empty for now. onCheck change is basically going to go update the completion. We're going to pass it the to-do and whether or not it was checked. So let's see what that call looks like. So this is the exposed version of like how to update a record, right? And it's very easy. You do a coroutine launch, just like you normally would. You start a suspended transaction, and then you run an update with todos.update. You pass in basically the where clause of what you want, and then you set the operation. In this case, we say the completed at is either going to be null or the date. That's it. And then I do a fetch here, which I'm not sure if that's the right place to put it. But then I do a fetch there, and it refreshes the list. Pretty straightforward. OK, so now we have to tell the onClick thing to go somewhere. Now it's got to go somewhere. So now we have to make a home for it. We need the form for it to go to. So this is what we have in sort of the, this is kind of where we're at with everything. And we want it to be able to go to this. We want to be able to add a new to-do, and we also want to be able to edit a to-do. Again, all these components are in Vaadin. Like I literally didn't, I'll show you, but like I didn't create any of these buttons. I didn't create these form fields. I didn't create this dialog. Like it's just all there. I didn't pick this awesome date picker, just provided. So we're going to create another component called to-do form. And what this is going to have is you're going to pass in the to-do that's nullable. So if it's null, it will be assumed that you want to add a new one. And if you pass a to-do, then it will say, oh, I want to edit something. And then when you delete it, or if delete is clicked, what should it do? And then again, if it's saved, what it should do. The save will then be either the edit, the sort of update expose thing, or an insert. So the form extends off of K-composite again. At the top of this class, we're just creating a bunch of the fields, basically, right? We're going to create a dialog, a title field, due date, notes, and user field. And you can see all the different sort of types that it provides. So these are all Vaadin components: dialog, text field, date picker, text area, select, kind of the whole gambit of things you can create in a form. And so this is how they are used. So the first thing is we're going to do an open dialog, which all it does is that pops open something, right? It pops open a dialog, and then you're going to jam some stuff into it. The stuff we're going to jam into it is this form layout. A form layout is nothing special. It's basically a vertical layout where you can say how many columns you want. And we're going to have all of the fields that we need for our form jammed in there. There's some attributes, like is it required, and other stuff in there. The sort of only other nuance here is that if we did pass in a to-do, we want to set the value to the to-do that we passed in, right? There is stuff in Vaadin to help you do data binding very easily without having to explicitly set it. It's OK. Sometimes it's a little wonky. Sometimes it's a little tricky. So I just do it explicitly here just to be clear. So this is just basically saying, if you pass in a to-do, fill the values in so it's not an empty form. And then the other part of the form is basically 3 buttons, right? It's going to be the delete button if the to-do was provided on a new record. There obviously is not going to be a delete button. Cancel button and a save. Cancel just closes the dialog, doesn't do anything special. And then when you save, it's going to do a validation, get the to-do model, and then go save it. So again, like pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Now the one little nuance here is that these users for assignee have to come from the database, right? They're not going to be static. Whoever we put in the database is what we want to show here. So we got to go fetch those guys and jam them into the form before we show it. So how do we do that? So we have a little method called fetch users, which goes and fetches the users. And then again, using my little semi-hacky observable model, listens for those users. And if they are returned, it will set that drop-down's values to whatever is passed back. And then again, if there is an existing person that's selected, it will fill it with that value so that on the edit version, it's filled. So how does the database do that? Well, it's just a simple select. Like, I don't want to make it sound like it's not doing anything important, but this is pretty simple, right? It's doing, again, a suspended transaction. We run it on the IO thread. We do users.selectAll, and then we map it to a user object. That's it. That list of users is passed over to the dropdown. Dropdown knows how to render it. Simple. OK, so we're going to open the form. So there's 2 ways you can open the form. You're either adding a new to-do or you're going to edit an existing to-do. So this is trivial, but there's a to-do button just hanging out up there. I probably could have made that nicer, but it's just hanging out up there. And this is the change to do that, right? So we're in the top of the vertical layout, just below the title. We're just going to add a button that says Add To Do. I feel like I'm just telling you basic stuff, but that's what it's doing. It has a little icon called Vaadin Icon Plus. And then on click, what it's going to do is open the to-do form. And because we're not editing one, we don't pass in a to-do. And then we're going to, when save is clicked, we're going to go run the insert. So what does the insert look like? This is our first insert. We're going to pass it a to-do. And again, I'm just repeating myself here, a new suspended transaction using the dispatcher IO thread. We're going to insert a to-do with the receiver, telling it it's going to be the title, do at description, and user ID to the values that we picked in the form. And the form is going to just send all those values over to us. And then we do a fetch. Again, I don't know if that's the best place to put it. That's where I put it. All right, editing a to-do. Again, pretty straightforward. The only difference here is that you're going to be passing in which to-do was clicked, right? You're going to say, hey, this one is the one I want to edit. So this link up there is what you're going to go for. So the only difference here is that we are, just to remind you, this is what our signature is. We're not going to pass in, we are going to pass in a to-do this time. So this is what that looks like. And so not much to say about this other than the to-do is passed in. The one change we're going to do now is that when you open that, is that the to-do form, we're going to instantiate a to-do form, and then we're going to pass in that to-do. And then we're going to say when they click the save button to go run the update function. So again, I'm sorry to just kind of be repeating myself. We're going to go to the view model. We're going to launch a suspended transaction. And we're going to update the thing that was sent to us with the values that were sent to us. Simple enough. OK. There's two remaining things, and I'll blow through them so we can get out of here in 35. The second to last thing is deleting a to-do. So this would be my promise to do all the CRUD operations. So this is an existing to-do, and if we undelete it, there's a little delete button here. I didn't do a validation on it, or I didn't do a pop-up check. You could do that here. So when you click that button, this is what it looks like, right? It's going to do on-click delete, and then we're going to close the dialog. The change that we need to make is over on the grid itself, right? We need to say we have this right now, right? And so what we want to then is pass the click action or the delete action to it. Not too crazy. You could probably figure out what the method is called, and you can probably figure out what the expose transaction is going to look like. Suspend transaction. Delete where obviously is a little bit different than delete. Delete is just delete all the records. Delete where, obviously you give it a where clause, so you're going to say wherever the ID equals that to do, goes and deletes. There's my weird fetch hanging out. Pretty straightforward. So we've done all the CRUD operations. We have a to-do checkbox component. We have a to-do form component. We've got a list functional. And I should just sort of mention, I didn't even cover all the other things that Vaadin can do. It can do sorting, drag and drop, all sorts of fun stuff that you can just kind of get with the components out of the box. OK, the last thing we're going to do is a really quick search thing. So there's a search bar up top. So we are going to add it to our layout. So this is what it looks like. It's just a text field. We set it to be wide, or I'm sorry, we set it to be the full width. The clear button is a little X when there's text in it. The placeholder value, so what it shows when there's no text in there yet. The value change mode is lazy, which basically debounces it, I think 700 milliseconds. And then a value change listener. Every time when it's done debouncing and it sends a value, we're going to go do a fetch, and we're going to pass the search term over to the view model. That was that. So the difference here is that now our fetch before was blank, right? We weren't passing a search term. Now we need to do something with that. So the view model is going to change a touch. So this fetch method is now going to take a search term, which is null by default. If you don't pass anything, it searches for everything, or it just runs a query for everything. So this is what the method looks like now. You can see the search term is at the top. However, we're not using it in the query just yet. And so that's what we need to do. So here's a query where you join it, and you do all your order bys and everything. And this reflects a little bit what I was talking about earlier, which is now if you just want to add a little dynamic touch to this, where sometimes there's a clause run, and sometimes there isn't, this is where it's really useful. So now I'm going to say, if that search term, which I stashed in the view model, is there, it's not null, now I'm going to add a where clause to the query. Right? So now this doesn't get added unless it's there. It's really nice. So you can, again, consider things that have like, let's say you have 4 filters on your thing, right, on your form. You would have a few different if statements here, and it's really easy to just kind of see what the query is going to be, even without looking at the SQL that it generates. And so this is what you get. If I type the word in review, it cuts the list dynamically down to the 4 items, and search works. All right, so we did it. We did all our CRUD operations. We did all that fun stuff. I did it in almost 35 minutes. So what did we accomplish? 0 configuration app server, all the database CRUD operations, reusable components with DSL syntax, high-fidelity UI with very little CSS, and 0 JavaScript, right? And all the things we didn't do, whoops, all the things we didn't do, no HTML, mostly no CSS, no JavaScript, no React, no Angular, none of that. None of that stuff. All we had to do was just write it in Kotlin. That's it. This is where the repo is. If you want to use it, you can download it, run it off of that main method, and it'll run. That's it. Don't forget to vote. Let's go party.